Now I want to welcome to the show Principal Medical Officer Dr. Vishwanath Partap Singh, as well as the Chief Immigration Officer Sharmeen Gandhi Andrews. Welcome back to the show, Sharmeen. Dr. Partap Singh, I want to start with you just to expand a little bit. Jesse Ramdeo said in that story there are mounting fears that coronavirus will come to Trinidad and Tobago. However, the student was a little bit optimistic in referencing that per capita it may not come. Is that something you agree with?
So I think first we need sorry about that, still asleep. I think first we need to be specific and identify that this is a novel coronavirus we're speaking about and not label them all, because the coronavirus is a family of viruses. So novel coronavirus. I want to agree with the student from the perspective that when you're looking at statistics and numbers, the risk to us is low. The risk of a case arriving is relatively low compared to other areas. Now, that does not mean we do not need to prepare. And I really like the measures that the student spoke about in terms of the hygiene and hand washing, because really it does come down to that. Like any other viruses, it really does come down to maintaining your distance if you see someone is sneezing and coughing, hand washing with soap and water as best as you can, sneezing into a tissue and discarding that and then washing your hands. Those are the measures at the personal level. I mean, we can talk more about the measures that the Ministry of Health is engaged in, and the measures are commensurate with the risk that we see. So yeah, so that's really what, I mean, even the WHO and the Caribbean Public Health Agency, in their estimation of the risk to countries within the region, they have cited the risk as being low relative to, compared to other countries.
How is that, people will ask, because we live in such an international environment. You've got flights coming into the airport every day. We're a big hub for foreign visitors. We've got cruise ships landing or docking at our ports.
So the risk assessments that are being, and the screening that is being conducted at the ports at the airports, ports and seaports, where there is active in-country transmission, such as in Wuhan, the screening is really intense. It is both an interrogation, a questioning as to their travel, their exposure. Because that's the other thing, it is not just travel history, it is exposure history. So that means someone as a healthcare worker who would have cared for someone who would have visited a relative, who had the novel coronavirus. So when you look at the exit screening that is coming out, persons leaving these ports, it is quite intense. Yes, there is a temperature scanning. There is also and I said the exposure history. Did you travel to? Did you go to a market with live animals? Did you handle live animals? Did you come in contact with anyone who displayed any of the symptoms of? And that is really the base, because when you look at the cases in the other countries outside of mainland China, the cases all had a direct exposure history, either travel to or was a close contact of someone who was confirmed with the case.
Sharmeen, that exposure that Dr. Partap Singh speaks of has been the source of much contention, especially over the last week. It reached a height last week, actually, that your agents on the front line will be exposed or can be exposed to this potential virus.
Well, the frontline officers will be exposed to any virus, because you're talking about foreign nationals coming in at all times. And the key thing is for officers as well to protect themselves, and the same measures that Dr. Partap Singh would have outlined is the same measures that anybody on the front line, immigration officers, customs officers, and anybody interacting, even the airline agents, they have to take the same precautions. Typically it involves, and we have a habit, and most officers utilize gloves when they're handling passports on a normal basis, because you'd be surprised where people keep passports. Even in terms of wearing a mask, there are masks available. And it is incumbent on the officer really to protect themselves and utilize those resources. Wear the face mask, utilize the gloves. We have on a regular basis, as a normal thing, to have hand sanitizers at each booth for the officers. So, and this happens at all ports of entry, not just the airport, but at every port of entry. So the officers take precautions, and of course now, because of the hype, I guess, they need to take extra precautions as well. we're going into the carnival season. So typically during the carnival season, we would have had persons coming in with the flu, and a lot of people come in with chicken pox and that kind of thing. So there are a number of things we can be exposed to. The officers are in an enclosed area with a glass around them, you know, which is an added layer of protection, but it does not eliminate the fact that they do have to wash their hands, and they do have to wear the gloves, and they do have to wear the masks.
You talk about the masks, you talk about the gloves. The PSA president, this is where it reached the height of contention over the last week. He had serious concerns about the resources given to these frontline officers. You as Chief Immigration Officer, what are your thoughts on his opinion, his concerns?
Well, granted, everybody has a concern, and the PSA president represents the interest of his members. I too have a staff of 400 officers that I have to protect, and we ensure at all times that there are masks, there are gloves, there's hand sanitizer, and there's an assistant chief at the airport to ensure that there are things happening. There are resources at the airport, not only an assistant chief, but 2 grade 4 officers. So we ensure that we have it. We ordered 1,000 masks just last week to be delivered today. The Ministry of Health would have provided us with masks last week as well for the use of officers at the front line. So the resources are there, and again, it comes down to the officers utilizing it. Some officers don't like to use it. I myself don't. But I guess as we move along and it becomes more imperative for them to utilize it on a daily basis once they're on duty and they're interacting with passengers.
You've just heard the resources that Charmaine has talked about, Dr. Partap Singh. Gloves, masks, etc. Are those enough from what you've heard?
So I'm happy that you asked that question, and I'm happy with the measures that Chief Immigration Officer has sort of put forward, because it really does come back to the measures, the physical distancing, that barrier that you have, the hand washing. So I think those measures are sufficient. The WHO actually put out a communication recently, I think it's on their website, that speaks to the use of face masks and other sort of measures that one can take. And it's a good read because it puts into context the use of masks, because when you use a mask, you have to be careful with the removal of the mask. It can give you a false sense of security, because let's just think about it. You have a mask on, you think all is well. You have gloves on, you think all is well. But then you're on your phone, you have the pen, you touch your passport, you adjust the mask, and so you are contaminated. You have the potential to cross-contaminate for, as you say, any virus, any sort of pathogen that comes in. Hand washing is key. Maintaining the distance with someone who you know is sneezing and coughing is key.
Dr. Partap Singh, Carnival 2020. The health minister says, no way, Jose, it's going ahead. Right decision?
Yeah, because you see, when you, again, looking at the risk and looking at the measures that we have in place, something I wanted to talk about, and maybe this will help to understand what goes on behind the scenes. On a regular basis, a weekly basis, we look at persons, number of persons who present with fever and respiratory symptoms. And when you look at the case definition for, or the criteria for what is or who, how to begin identifying a case of the novel coronavirus, it begins with fever and respiratory symptoms. So this is something we have ongoing. It's been ongoing for a long period, for as long as I remember, and even before that. And because of that, we have an understanding of patterns. Be it carnival season, be it non-carnival season, we have an understanding of the patterns, and that serves as a base for us. What it helps us to do is that when or if there is an increase, or we start to see a sudden increase in persons with fever and respiratory symptoms, because people can present with multiple causes of fever and respiratory symptoms. It doesn't have to be the novel coronavirus. When we start to see, or if we see an increase that is unusual for a particular area, then we go in and we do active surveillance. We find out who these people are. We put the measures in place that are commensurate with the risk for a spread of any particular. So that's one measure. The other one is within hospitals. We have a similar system where persons presenting with pneumonia, meaning respiratory infection of the lungs that you have difficulty in breathing. So you're severe enough, saying that even if we don't catch you at the health centers, you're in the hospitals and you have respiratory symptoms severe enough, that's called SARI surveillance, S-A-R-I, severe acute respiratory infection. That is also a system that has been ongoing. So we have two of these measures that really provide a big stage screen, if you want to put it that way, that we always look at and use as reference to see whether what we are observing is in accordance with what we've observed in past seasons. And from the minute we see that there is any change in that, we take the measures. And these measures are in place. There are guidelines, there are standard guidelines. WHO has actually even issued guidelines to the extent that if you see the first few cases of novel coronavirus, there are guidelines to follow. There are standard procedures to follow. We did a simulation exercise recently, last week Friday, where we included the Airports Authority, Port Authority, the Regional Health Authorities, the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management. It was a real multi-stakeholder, and we span the scenario to an aircraft arriving with someone with fever and respiratory symptoms, a sea vessel arriving with fever, somebody presenting at a health center, someone in hospital. So, and when we tested three things in that simulation. One was the timeliness of responding or alerting, the national mechanism. And we were happy with the response that we got, in the sense that the physicians or the frontliners, the first responders, did what they needed to do and sent the message up. The second thing that we tested was the ability to implement the detection measures. So to say that, okay, you present with fever and respiratory symptoms, what are the chances that this is the novel coronavirus? And again, we were happy with that. And again, it was commensurate with the risk that we believe that, not even what we believe, what science says. So I don't know if that helps to shed some light, right? That's from the technical side, from what the ministry is doing to sort of reassure that systems are in place, that if something were to, and again, it doesn't have to be the novel coronavirus, because that's not the only coronavirus or the only viral pathogen that is circulating around that we need to be aware of when we're in crowds.
Shameen, Carnival is also going to be, as everything that Dr. Partap Singh is saying, it's also going to be a huge season for you and your 400-strong team.
Yes, as it is every year when we have an influx of persons. But what we are doing now is to take an extra step in screening persons to find out exactly where they are coming from. So the key is, did they originate in China? And there are different ways we can find that out. One is through the Joint Regional Communications Center, and they screen all of the passengers coming in terms of advanced passenger information, where the passenger would have come from. So if there's a hit for any person coming out of China, then we know right away this flight is coming in with this passenger, alert Port Health so that they could meet the aircraft on arrival. That's one. The other thing is that some persons, depending on their travel pattern and which countries they're going to, the Regional Communications Center may not pick up that the passenger originated in China. And therefore, the immigration officer, in determining where the passenger came from, looking at their tickets, looking at the stamps in their passport and the interview, can find out, okay, yes, this passenger did originate in China. We had one such case yesterday, and that passenger was returned to their port of entry. They were screened by Port Health. There was no issue. However, because there's a travel ban, that person was returned to their port of embarkation. So those are the measures.
So the person is not in Trinidad?
Yes, the person is not in Trinidad and Tobago. So, and the airlines are well aware that this is the process, and it's not the passenger leaving on whatever is the next available flight. The passenger is leaving on the next flight to that last port where they came from. Of course, this is based on the discussion with Port Health and the screening that would have taken place if the person has to be in isolation and whatnot. So those are measures that we are taking. The hits on the advanced passenger information, the extra screening and interview of the passenger by the immigration officer.
Travel advice. We've got Trinis in and out of this country every day. What is the travel advice to traveling people?
Well, the question is whether they have gone to a place where there's a virus, an outbreak of the virus. The thing with a Trinidad and Tobago national, according to legislation, they have a right of entry. And therefore, special measures have to be taken. I can't refuse a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, even someone who's a permanent resident of Trinidad and Tobago. They need to take their own precautions, and once they come back in from a place where there's an outbreak, they will be screened by Port Health, and active measures will be taken by the Ministry of Health in terms of monitoring or isolating that individual.
Possibly quarantined.
Precisely.
I just want to get final thoughts, Dr. Partap Singh. We were mentioning it during the break about panic in Trinidad and Tobago, and you feel that this may be more panic than actual fear.
And I don't want to use that word, but it is important that we look at the information that's coming out and paint a picture and see what we find. And when we look at the information that's coming out, that's there across the world, we see that the majority of cases are in mainland China. We see that the cases that are outside of mainland China are persons who had direct contact. And then when we look at even bigger picture now, giving what the Chief Immigration was talking about, the sort of responsibility, the behavior among persons who have traveled, some of them are actually voluntarily isolating in the sense of staying away from maintaining that distance for the periods of time. And I appreciate that measure that they are taking on their own, because it says to me that they are acting responsibly. It's one of the measures, like the hand washing and the cough, and covering your cough and so. So when you ask the question about whether I think this is panic, I will answer from a science perspective. I would say I wouldn't want to use it panic. I would say it's caution, it's interest, it's seeking information to clarify a situation that we do not know about in terms of how this virus is spread, what are the animals that you cause in terms of contact. And that is interesting. That brings about discussion, it brings about dialogue. And if we have to be careful to not allow that dialogue to translate into a panic. And that's where information and the correct source of information is important.
We're heading towards the 7 o'clock news now, but my final question to you, Dr. Partap Singh, is that a lot of people, and the big question is really, how far are we at? Is there going to be an anti-vaccine at some point? Because we've been down this road before in terms of bird flu and SARS and H1N1.
Yeah.
How far are we from that? Because people are dying. Hundreds of people have already been killed by this virus.
Right, but again, like you said, we're talking about the dying. The deaths that have occurred have been in persons who are elderly, who are at greater risk, who have other comorbid conditions. So we need to put it into context. In terms of the vaccine, when you, again, listening to the WHO, feedback from WHO and other persons, scientists involved in the process, the estimates are conservative in the sense that we're looking at a longer period of time, maybe up to as much as a year, when a vaccine can perhaps become available, because there are processes that vaccines need to go through, trials and so before, to test the safety that's associated with it, the efficacy and the effectiveness of it. Does it really work? And so that takes time, and it does not, even with the vaccine, the measures, the personal measures that you need to take, the personal protective measures remain regardless, because there are other causes of respiratory symptoms, fever and respiratory symptoms.
Well, listen, Dr. Vishwanath Partap Singh, Shamin Gandhi Andrews, thank you very much for talking us through the coronavirus, a novel coronavirus that sweeps across the globe. We won't end our conversation there, because when we come back, Professor Christopher Ora will talk to us about different aspects of this virus. How did it actually begin? There are so many questions still that even scientists can't answer in the second hour of the Morning Brew.